All right, I am going to test your knowledge of Audrey Hepburn movies quotes. See if you can finish this quote. The rain in Spain. All right. The ladies, they know that. Yes. That's from My Fair Lady. But the theme of my little story at the beginning is the pain in Spain was caused mainly by a sprain. I was in Spain, and I shared this story with you a little bit. I was studying my senior year. I had a 4.0 average heading into my semester abroad in Seville, Spain. Seville. And started working there, had a great first month. Classes were going great. I was taking 4 classes at the university there, just regular classes at their university, so I was fully immersed in Spanish. My Spanish was getting better. In fact, I met this one girl from Texas and that moved in next door, and she was like, "How long have you been here?" I was like, "Just a month." And she's like, "Oh my goodness, your Spanish is getting really good." And just when I decided I'm not going to talk to anyone in English. I didn't speak any English for the whole month, and it was going so well. Classes were going great. Was meeting people, having a lot of fun. I was running in the mornings like I always do. Actually, I don't always do it now, but I used to. I used to always run. I got out and would get out and run. And as I was running through the streets kind of cobblestone and different brick and things like that, there was just this huge pothole, and I was running, and I stepped in the pothole, and a severe sprain on my ankle, on my, I think it was my left ankle. And I could barely make it back to my house where I was staying. Well, it was a bummer because everywhere you went for class was by foot. I didn't have a car. There wasn't even public transportation there. Seville was this little city. There's a circle, and all the roads kind of shot out from there. And I was close to the center. One of my classes was a couple miles south. A couple miles to the east was another one of my classes. Another class was to the north. And I don't know the exact directions, but they were 3 different directions from the place. And I had a really hard time. So I went to the doctor, and I got they have free medicine in Spain. Well, I went to 3 different doctors, and they all 3 gave me 3 different things and told me 3 different things to do, and they examined my sprain. Long story short, I started having some real severe problems sleeping. Found out later some of the medications that they gave me were keeping me up and having adverse reactions, as one doctor didn't know what this doctor was prescribing, and I was taking 2 or 3 different things for my ankle, and I started really sinking. All of a sudden I wasn't sleeping. I had trouble paying attention in Spanish, let alone English. I mean, I was having trouble just functioning. I was in pain with my foot. To add to all of that, my father had just lost his job back at home in Georgia, and I had just moved him from his, anyway, the long story short is that there was a lot going on. My dad had lost his job. I kind of liked this girl, and then I thought maybe we would talk in college the next year, and then she told me she just didn't want to continue communicating. I hurt my ankle. I started stressing out. I started failing my classes, so I dropped the semester. I came home, and I felt like a failure. It's the first time I hadn't been able to make it through a class. Not only just make it through a class, but I had all A's in school. And now I had to drop out of school. And furthermore, the program said, well, since you dropped out and you didn't complete it, you have to pay for the program because your scholarship will not pay for the program. So now I'm $7,000 in the hole as a 19-year-old. Actually, I was 21-year-old. And I really started going down into a dark place. Was overwhelmed. Physically, my ankle still hurt. I still had that pain. I didn't have my scholarship anymore. Now I'm in debt. Everything just started weighing on me. The storms of life can sometimes make us feel powerless and alone. The subject of our sermon today is, how can we weather these storms that make us feel powerless and alone? Our text, as you know, is from the book of Mark. We're in Mark 34, 35. So turn with me to Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. We're going to look at the conditions of a storm, the consequences of a storm. We're going to see a calming of the storm, and then the conclusion of the storm. And again, we're going to see how can we weather the storms of life. If you are able to stand with me, let's stand as we read God's word. Mark 4, verse 35. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Sometimes the most familiar passages are the hardest to preach and the hardest to listen to, because your brain goes, "Oh yeah, I know this one. I hear, yeah, I know how it goes. Yeah, I got this. I got it." So I want you to try to fight against that you already heard this story, you know it, you maybe have heard sermons on it, maybe even remember a sermon on it, and I want you to try to think through and see this with fresh eyes. Let's look at the conditions of this storm that the disciples found themselves in. After a full day of ministry, remember this chapter starts out with Jesus getting into a boat. Why did he get into a boat? There were so many people pressing around him, he got in a boat and went back a little bit from the shore so he could speak to them so that he wasn't crushed under all of them coming in. So he started out that day, he started telling them stories. We went through the parable of the soils. We have him talking to the disciples. We have other parables that Mark puts in here. But the disciples have had a full day of ministry. And so has Jesus. And it says here that on that day, evening came. He said, so who said? Jesus said. It's Jesus' idea. Let's get in the boat. Let's go across. Now they're over towards Capernaum, which is on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. He's going to head to the east side of the Galilee, which is really not Jewish. It's more Gentile focused. We've already seen there's a synagogue in Capernaum. There were Jewish people there. Jesus has already interacted with the scribes there. People from Jerusalem came to Capernaum. But now he's headed to the east, where there's not as much of a Jewish presence, where the word, the gospel, the story, maybe even of the Old Testament, wasn't as well known. But what's the primary reason that they're going? He says, let us go across the other side. And it says, and leaving the crowd. Jesus, I think, is just leaving this crowd. He's already said he wants to go to all the other cities. There are other places that he needs to go, other cities. And maybe that's on his mind. He's also given these people, I think, his time. He's healed them. He's given them the message, and it's time to step out. He also may have just needed a break. And we see that Jesus is asleep on the boat. He's tired. He's been preaching probably all day in front of these people out in the Sea of Galilee. But it was in obedience to Christ that they got in the boat and go across the sea. I think sometimes we encounter storms in life right after a win, right after a spiritual victory, right after something good happening in our life, right after something that we're feeling awesome about. That sure was my case in Spain. I had a great summer in Daytona Beach. And I was the project director for a project of 66 college students at Daytona Beach. We saw the gospel go out. We saw people reached. I got to share Christ with kids and adults and people on the beach. And we saw people come to Christ. And I I got to lead and teach, and it was just a wonderful summer. And then I go off, and then the storm hits. It reminds me of the story of Elijah. And I know you know that's some of the stories of Elijah. But Elijah had an amazing interaction with the prophets of Baal. That was in 1 Kings 18. Y'all nod your head if you remember this story, right? What did they build? An altar. And he said, go ahead, see if Baal will show up, right? And so they do this, and they can't get Baal to ignite the altar. They made a sacrifice, and Baal was supposed to come and burn it up, but he didn't. And Elijah says, maybe he's asleep. Maybe that's what's going on. Wake him up, yell louder. And they did, and they couldn't do anything. And then he says, okay, now my sacrifice, pour water. And they just kept pouring more water and water till water ran down over all the wood, all the stones, everything. And what happens? Fire from heaven comes, whoosh, licks up not only the water, the stone, everything's gone. And then Elijah says, attack these false prophets of the Baals. And they do. The people rise up. He leads the Jews to rid their area of this false prophet, this idol of Baal. It's an amazing victory. Next chapter, 1 Kings 19. Jezebel says, I am coming after you, Elijah. And he runs scared, afraid for his life. He flees her. A lot of times, storms come when we're being obedient to Christ. And sometimes even after something really good has happened, some spiritual win, some great thing. You see, the disciples were told by Jesus, go, get in the boat, let's go across. And then they encounter this huge storm. It's not because of their disobedience, although sometimes that is why we encounter storms. I'm reminded by another guy in the Old Testament. You may remember his name, Jonah, right? Jonah encountered a storm because he was running from God. And he gets on this boat, and they do hit a storm. And then he is just like Jesus. It's interesting, the similarities. Remember, where was Jonah when the storm was going on? He was asleep in the boat. And what did they say to him? Don't you know we're about to perish? Very similar to the words that the disciples say to Jesus. But Jonah, in this case, he was encountering this storm because of his disobedience, because he was running. So I won't say that it's never because of our disobedience, but it could be in obedience to Christ that we encounter a storm in life. And it could be right after something really good, or it could be right after us running away from God. Peter even encountered a storm and had doubt right after something very good, right? He's with Christ. He is just proclaiming Christ. They have communion. The Lord goes to the upper room, and they have Passover. They have communion. He's just feeling great. They go out to pray with Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane, and he falls asleep. So, the guards come, and what does Peter do to one of the servants of the temple? Cuts his ear off. I mean, that's bold. It's like, way to go, Peter. Awesome, man. Jesus says, he first of all, he puts the ear back on the individual and heals him right there. Don't you think you would stop arresting this person right there and then? Okay? Somebody cuts your ear off, and the person you're arresting puts your ear on and heals you, but he doesn't. But then right after that, what happens to Peter? Poor Peter. Denies Jesus 3 times. He's so scared that a little girl standing next to him at the fire, he has to lie to her because he's afraid of what she might think or what the people might do, or that he might be arrested as well. With Jesus, he's afraid and scared, even though hours before he had the boldness to step up and defend Christ with the sword. And even though he had seen all the amazing things that Jesus had done. The point I'm making is that storms can occur when we're disobedient, and even when we're being obedient and following Jesus. Elijah was doing God's will, and then Jezebel comes after him, and he is just overcome. It actually says he despaired for his life, and in in 1 Kings 19 that he prayed to God, would that my life would end because this woman is after me. Peter followed Jesus to the garden, but then after his arrest, he denies him. Jesus instructed the disciples to take the boat across the lake. They're obeying him. In other words, they're saying, why is this happening, Jesus? You're the one, you told us to go across the lake, and this storm hits us, and it was no small storm. It was no small storm. The consequence of the storm was very simple. Fear. The consequence of the storm was fear. It says the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. Now, this is not, I don't know what you think of when you think of boats. Maybe you think of like this jet boat, ski boat that you've been in, right? Or you think of like it's some ocean liner or some really nice closed hull boat where you've got a nice little cabin inside there. I don't know what comes to mind when you think of a boat. This was just an open bow wooden boat with a little part in the stern that had a little covering, a little higher at that point. It's where Jesus was sleeping. It says on a cushion. But then it's open and the waves are coming in the boat. There is nowhere for the water to go. No bilge pump in the boats here in the Sea of Galilee. Bilge pump is a pump that you have in your boat. When it fills up with water, it gets the water out of the boat so that you don't sink. It's filling up with water, and it says these guys were scared. The storm scared them. Now, these were not landlubbers. These were not guys that had never been on a boat. What were these men? Most of them, a lot of them. Fishermen. And where did they fish? The Sea of Galilee. They're in their home court. They're here in their boat, in a court. But you know what they know? They know when they should be scared. Because they've been in enough storms to know when storms aren't really that bad. And they've been in enough boats, and they've seen boats that have crushed under water because of the water filling in. And they know this is bad. And they're scared. They're filled with fear. When I was in college, my parents moved back to Georgia. Well, they moved to Georgia. So I went back to Florida to stay with a friend of mine who was my Sunday school teacher and his family that summer. Because I wanted to do an internship with my church in the youth, and so I did that. And I led a Sunday school class of college students as well at my church that summer. Well, we did a lot of fun things together, our college group. And one of the girls that was in our college group wanted to surprise us with something. And so everybody in the class was invited to go to this pier. And we get there, and she's got a boat from her dad. And she's going to take us from this pier on a little boat ride. She had like food and stuff. And then we were going to end up at this park on the other side of the river, right by the church. So the river is about a mile wide. At this point, Indian River in Stewart. And where we were going was more of a diagonal, it was about 1.5 miles jaunt, if that's a nautical term, I don't know. So we get in this boat and we start going, and all of a sudden the boat starts kind of slowing down. What was like a was like I'm like, why is the boat slowing down? And then we look down. Why is the boat filling up with water? We're halfway, we're right in the middle of the channel of the Indian River. About 1 mile, about 1/2 mile either way. I can't swim 1/2 mile. I know I can't swim 1/2 mile. Did we have life jackets? No, because we're a bunch of college kids that decided to do this at night on a whim, like just to go across. So we have no life jackets. It's in the middle, we're in the middle of the channel. The boat is filling up with water, and then it starts really rapidly filling up with water. And we just decided we're at the middle of the way. Like, which way do we go? We're like, we're just going to keep going this way. It seemed like it was a little closer to this park by the church. I was getting a little scared. And we made it just barely. The boat was almost full of water by the time we got there. I mean, the water is 2-3 feet up in this boat. And we get there, and the boat just like limps in to this harbor. And we get it tied up, and it's almost sinking down. Well, it turns out the girl didn't know that you had to put the plugs back in from the drain plugs for the boat. So we had driven this whole time with all the drain plugs open, and all the water had been just seeping in to the boat. We were really lucky we didn't just sink the boat right there. And I was scared. It was in the dark. We were in the middle of the water. I can only imagine how scared these guys were in the middle of the dark. There's not a mile away. They're in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. There's nothing around shore-wise. It's not just that the boat's full of water. There's a storm raging all around them, lightning and thunder, water coming. It's frightening. It's terrifying. They had no lights. They were afraid for their lives. They knew this was not good and it would not bode well for them. And then they turn around and they remember, oh, Jesus is with us. Where's Jesus? Where's he? He's asleep in the stern. Jesus! Wake up! They wake him up. Don't you care? Look at what's going on around here. We're going to die. Now, when I first read this, I really thought they were kind of like accusing Jesus of not caring about them. Do you not care that I am going to perish? But I think they're saying, don't you care that we're all going to die? Like, you're going to die. I'm going to die. We're all going to die. The boat is filling up with water. We're all perishing. All of us. The disciples were afraid. Even though they had seen Jesus take care of unclean spirits, heal the sick, cast out demons, heal a leper, forgive a paralytic and then give him the ability to walk, heal a man's withered hand, heal diseases, cast out spells, evil unclean spirits. Jesus explained all the things to his disciples, yet they saw these miracles and they had insight to the parables, yet they were filled with fear when the storm came. You think back to Elijah. How could he be fearful of this lady Jezebel when God had delivered all of the prophets of Baal and he had destroyed and killed all of the other enemies of Christ? How could Peter deny Christ 3 times after spending years with him and seeing all that Jesus did and knowing who he was and proclaiming, you're the Son of God, to Jesus? How could the disciples have fear after seeing what Jesus could do? Now we can sit back and criticize them for their fear and their doubt. But when the storms come, our natural response is fear and doubt. And it's sobering, and I think yet it's encouraging too. When you come to something and you have doubt and you have fear and you are really overcome with these sensations, you're in good hands. Elijah, one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament, struggled with that. The disciples who followed with Jesus struggled with that. One of the disciples, particularly Peter, struggled with that. We struggle with doubt and fear. When the storms come, they bring fear. And sometimes we struggle. And sometimes we doubt whether we're going to make it out of it. But what did they do? What did the disciples do? They turned to Jesus. And he calmed the storm. They brought their fear to Christ. Jesus was asleep in the boat. We don't know why he was sleeping. I think maybe he was just tired from a full day's ministry. Some commentators say he was asleep to kind of test their faith, to see what would happen. In other words, if Jesus was up walking around with them, they may have looked at him earlier or asked him, what to do, but they kind of had to figure this one out for themselves. Jesus is asleep, and here's the storm. What are they going to do? They're going to freak out. That's what they did. They freaked out. And they're fearful for their lives. And they go to Jesus, though, eventually. Why was he not freaking out? Well, maybe because he knew about the storm. Maybe he intended to lead the disciples into the storm and to see what they would do. with it on their own. Jesus awoke, he rebukes the wind, and he says, "Peace, be still," and the wind stops. There was great calm. Now the verb tenses change here. Up to this point, there were different tenses. Right now, when it says that Jesus spoke and that it became calm, it's in what's called the Heiress Tense. It's completed action. It's something almost immediate that happens as well. He speaks and immediately the wind stops. And immediately, there's not just calm, there is great calm. We've probably all been in a classroom where it's talking and then it's talking a little more and talking a little more, and small voices turn into kind of banter until it gets kind of crazy. And what does the teacher say? Quiet, be quiet. Not a good teacher, but a bad teacher might just yell out, "Be quiet." And in milliseconds, the class is silent, and you can hear a clock ticking in the room, and everyone just looking around going, it's kind of like that. Jesus speaks, but instead of a room of kids calming down, it's a storm calming down. It's lightning, it's thunder, waves. The deadly sea becomes like glass. Jesus calms the storm. Then he looks to them and he says, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" When Jesus conquered the storm, how was the disciples' faith? Was it strong or was it weak? What were they doing? What were the disciples doing while the boat was getting filled up with water? Were they like, "Oh, it's all right. The Lord has this. Let's pray. Let's just sing a song. Let's get together. Everyone, we're good." No, they were going, "What's going on? We're going to die. We're all going to die." And then they wake up Jesus and they say, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" I think it shows that their faith was struggling. They were in doubt. Just like we struggle. Just like our doubt comes up. Just like our faith wavers at times. Their faith was weak. And when did Jesus calm the storm? In the strength of their faith? In the confidence of their faith? No. Did they come to Jesus and say, "We know that you can calm the storm down, Jesus. Why don't you just say the word? Just do it. Just go ahead. Say it." And no, they said, "We're going to die. And don't you care that we're going to die?" I think that shows that their faith at that moment was pretty weak. Despite all they had been through, despite who they knew Jesus to be, at that moment, when they were in this storm, their faith was weak. But here's the beautiful thing. Even in the weakness of their faith, Jesus calmed the storm. They didn't have to have perfect faith for Jesus to act. You don't have to conquer all your doubts and all of your fears for Jesus to act and intervene in your life and do something for you, or in you, or through you. Jesus acted in the weakness of their faith, as feeble as it was. All we have to do is go to Jesus in the storm, pray to him, and seek his help. Despite your fear and doubt, despite what you think is the weakness of your faith, your job is just to go to Jesus. And in this situation, Jesus conquered the storm. Now, Jesus is always able to conquer the storm. Jesus is always able to calm the storm. Jesus can always remove whatever the turmoil is in your life, but he won't always do that. We see in this story, he does. What we have to remember is he always has the power to conquer the storms in our lives. He always has the ability because he is God. Jesus has the power to end any storm that you are in. Any situation that's causing you pain, anything that you are consumed by, Jesus has the ability to just take it away. He doesn't always do that. In this case, though, he does. He did it. But you need to know that Jesus can conquer the storm in your life, that no matter what it is, Jesus has the power to calm the storm. What did they say? Verse 41, they were filled with great fear and said, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Now, they didn't supply the answer here, but you and I can. This is Jesus, the Son of God. And that's what Mark is saying to you through this hypothetical question at the end that begs an answer. The answer is he's the Son of God, and Mark's already told us that at the beginning of his gospel. This is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And then we saw him declared the Son of God by none less than God the Father at his baptism, who said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." And then the demons, remember, screamed out, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus, Son of God?" And now we see that Jesus has power over the wind and the storms and the waves. No one has that power. Nobody has that power except God. And that freaked the disciples out. Because it's one thing to heal someone, because we have doctors that can heal. It's one thing to do something and you're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that was nice." Withered hand, you got it to stretch out. Okay, leprosy, you got that to go away. All right, this guy was in convulsions and now he's better. But to have a storm just stop instantly like that because he says, "Calm, be still," the disciples they're starting to realize this is Jesus and he is God. He has power over everything. And the point is, if he has power over the sea, if he has power over the waves, if he has power over all these things of nature that only God has, he has power over anything that comes your way. God is sovereign. He is over it. He's all powerful. He's in charge of the universe. And they declare, this is no regular man. No, Jesus is the Son of God. Who else other than God could command the wind and the sea? No one. So how can we weather the storms of life? Remember, Jesus is in the boat with you. Jesus is with you in the boat. Turn to him for help. There are many reasons why we go through storms. Some of them are because of our disobedience. Some of them are not. Some of them are because of our obedience. We're obeying God. We're doing what God wants us to do, and we encounter a storm. Think about what happened to the disciples through this, though. At the end of it, when it's all over, now they've had some traumatic issues and some time, and they got scared and they were afraid. But at the end, what did they learn? They learned something more about their faith, the weakness of it, where it was, and they learned of the power of Jesus that is absolute over everything. They gained more faith. Their faith was tested, and they got to see where it was, but then God used this to strengthen their faith. And a result of this, yes, they're afraid, who is this guy? But then ultimately that strengthened their faith. That Peter then could tell John Mark, this story and all of the details of it, and then he puts it into his gospel because his faith had been emboldened by the experience. After the fall with Adam and Eve, the result was there are going to be some bad things happen. Not just bad things, horrible things happen. Storms of life that will come and they will rock your boat and they will fill it with water and you will think that you are on the verge of death at times. You may be in a situation like that right now. Maybe it seems like you're being bombarded with rain and the thunder's rolling, the lightning's striking all around you. You feel helpless and overwhelmed. Remember, Jesus is with you in the boat. Turn to him for help. Maybe you just came out of a storm. Maybe you went through a storm, and looking back now, you see how God delivered you, how he brought you through the storm. May your faith grow. with a bigger view of God and a greater love for Jesus as a result of seeing him take you through that storm. It's not to punish you. It's not to make you just fearful. The fear is supposed to drive you to Christ and to then expand your faith when you see him take you through that storm. He doesn't promise to end every storm, but he's able to. We have to know that. He is able to. And he's in control of the storms. But most importantly, he promises to be in the boat with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. You have the Holy Spirit with you to help you in the midst of the challenges that come your way. Jesus is with you in the boat. He has the power to calm any storm. And if he allows the storm to continue, he will remain with you in the boat. He won't leave. He's not going to jump out. He's in the boat. Turn to him for help. I started this with the story about Spain and the pain in Spain because of the sprain. I was right there with Elijah. You know, life was bad, despairing for life. I turned to Jesus for help, and then I realized he had been there with me all along. He had been acting and moving, and I did not know it. And I came to the lowest point in my faith to then be strengthened by him, and really the strongest point in my faith that brought me to a greater confidence in who Christ was, that Jesus was real, that he was able to help me through my situation and get me through the storm. When I turned to him, I just proclaimed my faith in him and dependence upon him and trust in him, and then all these things started happening to kind of undo all that. My scholarship was renewed. They went ahead and paid that $7,000 for me because they saw the medical evidence of what I was taking and all of that together, and I didn't owe the money. I then got scholarship. Not only that, they paid that, and then they gave me an extra semester on top of it. Since they had already paid for a semester, I was short a semester, but they paid me an extra semester so that I could finish my degree plan without having to pay anything. My ankle healed up. I was fine by the start of school in January, back to running on campus. And my faith in God was stronger because I had gone through the storm. I knew now that Jesus was with me in the boat. When I went to him for help, he helped me to endure that storm and strengthen my faith in him. May he do the same with you.